The first day of the school year at Woodlands High was supposed to be just like every other. The students shuffled into the cafeteria, backpacks hanging heavy on their shoulders, their minds still hazy from the summer. The air buzzed with the excitement of reunions and the nervous tension that came with the unknowns of a new school year. But today, something was different. The moment they stepped onto the campus, there was an undercurrent of anticipation, a feeling of uncertainty hanging in the air. It wasn't just the new students, even the seniors could sense it. This year would not be like any other. Word had spread like wildfire in the days leading up to the start of school. Woodlands High had a new principal. Serena Williams. Yes, that Serena Williams, the tennis legend who had spent most of her life smashing records, breaking barriers, and winning titles. The news had been a shock to the entire school community. No one could figure out why she'd chosen to leave the world of tennis and come to a high school in the middle of nowhere. No one could understand what she would bring to a place where the brightest star was usually the quarterback of the football team or the lead in the spring musical. Serena Williams didn't belong here. Or so they thought. As the students filed into the auditorium for the first assembly of the year, they were greeted not by the usual hum of voices and scattered chatter, but by an unsettling silence. The lights dimmed, and the principal's office door swung open, revealing a figure standing at the front of the room. Serena Williams was tall, taller than most people expected, with a kind of physical presence that demanded attention. But it wasn't just her height. It was the way she carried herself, every movement purposeful, confident, measured. She wasn't just a figurehead in a suit. She was someone who had lived in the spotlight for most of her life, someone who had known both victory and defeat in ways few could understand. The room, which had been filled with murmurs just moments before, was now deathly quiet. The students watched, eyes wide, unsure of how to react. There were a few whispers of disbelief. Some tried to stifle their giggles, others just stared, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. Serena stood at the front, her gaze sweeping across the room with the sharpness of someone who had spent years reading crowds, figuring out their next move before they even knew what theirs was going to be. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The students knew this wasn't the typical welcome to school speech they were used to. They weren't getting a warm, fuzzy pep talk. This was something else. She took a deep breath, her voice breaking the silence, deep and steady, filling the room with authority. "Good morning," she said simply. "My name is Serena Williams, and I am your new principal." The words were casual enough, but they hit like a jolt of electricity. The students' minds raced, trying to process the dissonance between the person they knew from TV, known for tennis, fame, and a life far removed from their own, and the woman standing before them now, in charge of their education. "I know many of you are wondering why I'm here," Serena continued, folding her arms in front of her. "You've probably heard a lot of things. Rumors, maybe. Speculation about what kind of principal I'll be. Well, let me tell you one thing right now. I am not here to play games. I'm not here to be your friend. I'm here to make this school better. And if that makes you uncomfortable, good. Change doesn't happen without discomfort." There it was, the first challenge. And it was delivered without hesitation. Serena had made it clear from the start. She wasn't here to babysit. She wasn't here to settle into the comfortable rhythms of traditional schooling. She was here to disrupt. To push. The students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some unsure of how to process this new authority figure. After all, they had never seen a principal like this before. Their past principals had been more like bureaucrats, polite, friendly, easily ignored. But this was different. Serena's eyes never left them. "I've spent my life breaking barriers. Do you know what that means?" She paused, letting the question linger in the air. No one answered. "It means I've spent more time fighting the odds than most of you will ever understand. And I didn't get to where I am by being liked. I didn't get there by playing it safe." The tension in the room grew. You could feel it now, thick and heavy. The students were no longer just watching her out of curiosity. They were watching to see if she would break. To see if she could live up to the persona they had built in their heads. Serena's legacy in the world of sports had always been one of dominance. Could that translate to something as mundane as high school administration? "I'm here because I believe in this school," she said, her voice softer now, but still firm. "I believe in the potential of each and every one of you. But I won't let you waste it. I will not allow mediocrity to run rampant under my watch. I'm here to bring the fight out of you. To make you work for something more than just a diploma. To make you understand that what you do here, today, tomorrow, next year, it matters. You have no idea what you're capable of if you put your mind to it. The room was silent. She had them now. They were listening, hanging on every word. No one had dared speak this way to them before. I expect you to give me your best. And if you're not ready for that, if you're not willing to show up and put in the effort, then you might want to rethink where you are right now. Serena stepped forward, breaking the distance between herself and the crowd, her eyes scanning the students, locking with each one, as if she could see right through them. I'm not here to coddle you, she continued, her gaze intense. I'm here to challenge you. To make you realize that you are more than just a group of teenagers stuck in a classroom. You are the future. And if you don't start thinking that way, you'll get left behind. The speech ended. There was no applause, no cheers. Just silence. It was as if everyone had collectively held their breath, unsure if they were allowed to exhale. But Serena didn't wait for their approval. She didn't need it. She turned, walked to the side, and left the auditorium, leaving the students in stunned silence. As the door closed behind her, the room erupted. The murmurs came first, shocked whispers, hesitant comments. Did she just... What was that about? This year's gonna be different, huh? Some students were excited. Finally, a principal who would actually do something. Others were scared. How far would she go with this? How much change was coming, really? As the students filed out of the assembly, no one could deny the undercurrent of change that had been set into motion. The atmosphere at Woodlands High had shifted in that one moment. Serena Williams had claimed her ground, and she had done it without asking for permission. What they didn't know yet, what no one could have predicted, was that this was only the beginning. Serena Williams wasn't here to merely oversee the daily operations of a school. She wasn't here to settle into the routine. She was here to shake things up, to challenge them to think bigger, to reach higher. And the students of Woodlands High would soon realize that the game they were about to play had just changed forever. The next day, the atmosphere at Woodlands High was palpable. There was no more buzz of casual chatter or the easy rhythm of students making their way to classes. Every hallway, every classroom, seemed to hum with the weight of uncertainty. Students were talking, teachers were whispering, and everyone was trying to make sense of what Serena Williams' principalship would really mean for their everyday lives. In her office, Serena sat behind her desk, a picture of quiet resolve. Her mind wasn't on the incoming messages or the piles of paperwork waiting to be addressed. She was reflecting on the look in the students' eyes when she delivered that speech. It wasn't fear, nor was it anger. It was something much more interesting. Curiosity. That was her opening. Curiosity, the kind that leaves people questioning everything they thought they knew. She'd planted the seed, and now she had to water it. Her first move as principal was going to be unconventional. Every new principal would do a meet and greet with the staff, introduce herself in the usual get-to-know-me way. Serena Williams didn't do usual. She didn't want to be liked. She wanted to be respected. And there was a huge difference. Her morning started with a mandatory meeting for all teachers. As they filed into the teachers' lounge, there was a sense of expectation. They had heard the rumors about her, seen the media buzz, but this was real. She wasn't an athlete on a screen. They were about to meet the woman who was going to change everything. Serena stood by the large table at the front of the room, her posture straight and confident, arms crossed. The teachers, who had spent years navigating the bureaucracy of the school system, exchanged glances, unsure of what to expect. She waited until the room was quiet, not an easy task given the whispers that had followed her arrival. The last few new principals had been easygoing, relaxed. They smiled, shook hands, tried to be approachable. Serena wasn't here for that. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice even, but with an undeniable strength. "I know some of you may have concerns about me, about my ability to understand what goes on here, and that's fair. But what you need to know is this. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to make this school better, and if that means shaking things up, so be it." There were murmurs of surprise, maybe a few raised eyebrows, but no one spoke up. Serena continued. "I'm going to be straight with you. This school has gotten comfortable. And comfort is the enemy. The students here deserve more than just a diploma. They deserve to leave here with a sense of purpose, a belief in themselves that goes beyond a classroom grade. And if you're not prepared to push them, to push yourself, to challenge everything you thought you knew about education, then maybe you're in the wrong place. She wasn't asking for their approval. She didn't need it. Serena Williams had spent her entire life in an arena where criticism was constant, where failure was an option only if you were willing to let it define you. She wasn't about to let this school run on autopilot. "From now on, I'm expecting more from all of you," Serena said, her voice rising slightly. "This isn't just about teaching a subject, it's about instilling belief. It's about making these kids realize that their future isn't limited to the walls of this building. You're not just here to fill time. You're here to shape minds. If you're not in this for that, then you might want to think about what you're really doing here." The silence in the room was thick, but it wasn't discomforting. It was focused, almost as if the staff were trying to process what she had just said. The old guard, the veterans who had watched countless new principals come and go, couldn't help but admire the audacity of her words. Serena didn't waste time with pleasantries. She went straight to the heart of the matter. She left them with one final thought before dismissing the meeting. "I'll be in your classrooms this week. I want to see how you teach, how you engage with the students. But don't think I'll be watching from the sidelines. I'm here to help you be better, but only if you're willing to work for it." The students didn't know what hit them when the bell rang for the first class of the day. It wasn't just the regular chaos of kids running to their lockers and rushing to get to class. There was a new undercurrent, a tension that hadn't been there before. They had all been through the drill before. The first day was always full of promises, hopeful speeches, and vague declarations about change. But this time, it felt different. In one classroom, the teacher, Mr. Callahan, sat at his desk staring at the empty seat where his newest student should have been. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. When the door swung open, there stood Serena Williams herself. The room froze. Students who had been chatting immediately quieted. Mr. Callahan stood up, momentarily stunned. "Good morning," Serena said. "I'm here to observe today's class." The students exchanged glances. This was it. Serena was not some distant figure behind a desk. She was in the trenches, and she was here to see how things really worked. The tension in the room was electric. No one knew how to react. Serena walked to the back of the room and took a seat, not in the teacher's chair, but in the middle of the student section. It was deliberate. She wasn't looking down from her position of authority. She was a part of the class, and she was going to make them feel it. As the lesson began, it was clear that Mr. Callahan wasn't prepared for the intensity of her presence. His usual cadence faltered as he tried to adjust to the unexpected scrutiny. The students noticed. They always noticed. The change in the air, the difference in the way the lesson flowed, the way their teacher stumbled over words. It was subtle, but it was there. Serena watched intently, her eyes never leaving Mr. Callahan. When the bell rang to signal the end of the class, she was the first one to stand up. "Mr. Callahan," she said, her voice cutting through the murmur of the students filing out of the room, "I'll be having a conversation with you after school." The students, as they walked out of the room, exchanged looks, their minds whirling. Serena wasn't here to play nice. She wasn't here to give anyone a pass. If the teachers weren't going to meet her standards, they wouldn't last. She would make sure of that. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't yet understand, was that Serena wasn't just coming for the teachers. She was coming for the students too. And her plan, whatever it was, had already begun. As the day wore on, Serena's presence grew more and more palpable. She made it clear to every teacher that their methods were under review, and that the students, every single one, would be pushed beyond their comfort zones. The school was a machine, and Serena was here to grease the wheels, overhaul the system, and demand results. But beneath the surface, a question began to form in the minds of the staff and students alike. What exactly was Serena Williams trying to accomplish here? Was this all part of some grander vision? Or was she simply trying to leave her mark before moving on to something bigger? No one knew for sure, but one thing was certain: things at Woodlands High were about to get a whole lot more interesting. The weeks following Serena Williams' arrival were a blur of uncertainty and discomfort. For the first time in a long while, the students of Woodlands High began to question everything they had taken for granted. They were used to skating by, riding the easy rhythms of high school life. But Serena's leadership was an earthquake, shaking the very foundation of what they knew to be normal. And for some, it was terrifying. But for others, it was a wake-up call, a challenge they weren't ready to ignore. It was during the second month of the semester when things started to unravel in unexpected ways. Serena's presence had sparked whispers in every corner of the school, and the students were slowly beginning to recognize the quiet power that ran beneath her words. But while her challenge was being met with begrudging respect by some, others were beginning to rebel. The students who had always relied on their popularity, their charm, or their ability to coast through high school, found themselves out of their depth. And that wasn't something they were willing to tolerate. Serena had already begun pushing boundaries, setting high standards for everyone, and demanding accountability. Her decision to hold students accountable wasn't just about giving them a grade for a paper, it was about giving them a sense of ownership over their own lives, over their futures. But not everyone wanted to take ownership. Not everyone wanted to step up. The first confrontation came in the form of a student council meeting. As president, Samantha Perkins had always run the show. She was the star of the school, adored by her peers for her beauty, her charm, and her ability to get away with anything. But Serena didn't care about her charm, nor did she care about her status as the most popular girl in school. "You're late," Serena said when Samantha finally strode into the room, 10 minutes after the meeting had officially begun. Samantha flashed a smile, the kind that had always disarmed teachers and administrators alike. "Sorry, Principal Williams, I had some things to take care of." Serena didn't smile. She simply raised an eyebrow. "You'll need to take care of those things after this meeting. I don't make exceptions for anyone, not even student council presidents." Samantha's smile faltered, but only for a moment. She quickly recovered, taking a seat at the table, but she didn't take Serena's words lightly. This wasn't how things used to be. She wasn't used to being challenged. As the meeting went on, Serena made it clear that she wasn't interested in fluff or political games. She wasn't there to stroke anyone's ego or tolerate empty promises. She asked hard questions, pressed for real answers, and demanded that the student council actually do something, rather than simply talk about what they would do. "Student council isn't about popularity," Serena said bluntly. "It's about leadership. Real leadership. And leadership means showing up, taking responsibility, and being willing to take risks. If you're not willing to do that, then you're wasting everyone's time." The tension in the room was palpable. Samantha glared at Serena, but she knew better than to push back too hard. She had been used to getting her way, but now she was facing something she hadn't encountered before. Someone who wasn't afraid to challenge her, to call her out. Later that evening, after the meeting had ended, Samantha found herself standing in front of Serena's office. She had planned to drop by, to voice her frustrations, but something inside her held her back. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected to feel this small. The power dynamic had shifted overnight, and she wasn't sure how to handle it. Meanwhile, in the classroom, Serena's impact was becoming undeniable. Mr. Callahan, despite his initial embarrassment, had taken her words to heart. He had begun reworking his lesson plans, aiming to make history feel alive, to make it relevant. It wasn't perfect. His transition from a rote memorization approach to something more interactive and engaging was difficult, but the students were beginning to notice. For the first time in years, the students weren't just zoning out during his lectures. They were engaged. They were asking questions, challenging him, and sparking debates. Serena had made it clear that mediocrity wasn't acceptable, and the ripple effect was everywhere. Some students thrived under the pressure, rising to the occasion. They began to realize that they weren't bound by their grades, their past, or the expectations others had placed on them. They were free to shape their own futures, if they were willing to put in the work. But not everyone was willing to take that step. Some students were beginning to crack under the strain, overwhelmed by Serena's unyielding expectations. The rebel faction of students, the ones who had never been challenged before, the ones who had lived their high school years without consequences, began to gather in secret. They called themselves the Resistance. At first, it was harmless. They met in quiet corners of the school, sharing complaints about Serena's leadership, about the rules she was enforcing, about the way she made them feel small. They whispered about getting her out of the school, about making sure she would leave. But as the weeks passed, their anger grew. One day, in the middle of class, a note was slipped onto Serena's desk. It was crude, filled with sarcastic jabs, insults, and a declaration, "Leave or else." Serena read it without emotion, crumpled it up, and threw it in the trash. But she knew something needed to be done. The next morning, Serena called a school-wide assembly. As the students filed into the gym, whispers filled the air. They didn't know what she was going to say, but they knew this was going to be something big. When the gym fell silent, Serena walked out onto the stage. The usual formalities were absent. There were no pleasantries, no fluff. Serena Williams had never been one to dance around an issue, and she wasn't about to start now. "I've heard there's a group of students among you who believe they can challenge me," Serena said, her voice loud and clear. "I've heard that some of you think I can't push you to be better, that I can't make a difference in your lives." The students shuffled uneasily. They had expected something like this, but hearing it from Serena's mouth made it real. "I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. If you think this is a game, then you're sorely mistaken. I'm not here for the drama, the secrets, or the games. I'm here to make sure you leave this school better than you came in. And if you think I'm going to back down because of some petty rebellion, then you've got another thing coming." She paused, letting her words settle into the air. The tension was thick, like the calm before a storm. "If you want to fight me, go ahead," she said, her voice softening for the first time. "But know this, you're not fighting me. You're fighting for something far more important. You're fighting for your future. And if you choose to waste it, then that's on you." The silence in the gym was deafening. Serena stood tall, her gaze sweeping across the room, daring anyone to challenge her. But no one spoke. No one moved. She didn't need to say anything else. She had already won. As the days passed, the resistance began to fade into the background. The students who had once felt the need to push back against Serena's authority found themselves questioning their motives. Some of them fell in line, reluctantly at first, but eventually they started to see the value in her challenge. Others, however, couldn't shake the need to rebel, and for them, the battle was far from over. But Serena wasn't here to make everyone like her. She was here to change lives, to push every single student to realize their potential, to fight for something greater than themselves. And she was going to make sure they did. The silence after the assembly stretched on, as if the entire school had collectively held its breath. No one dared to speak. The students shuffled out of the gym, unsure of what had just transpired but feeling the weight of Serena's words in every step they took. The air around Woodlands High had thickened, as if the atmosphere itself was holding on to the tension. Serena's influence wasn't subtle, it never had been. Her approach to leadership had always been blunt, direct, and without compromise. But what made her different from other authority figures was her ability to demand respect without asking for it. She didn't need their approval. She didn't need to be liked. All she needed was results. And she was going to get them, whether they were ready or not. But not everyone was ready. It was during the next week when the first real act of defiance took place. A group of seniors, students who had never known a day of real consequence, decided they had had enough. They had been used to skirting by, skipping classes when they felt like it, showing up just enough to pass. They had always been the ones to charm their way out of trouble. But Serena wasn't about to let that happen. The rebellion started small, a whispered plan between students who felt cornered by Serena's high expectations. It was in the hallways, in the bathrooms, in secret messages passed between those who saw themselves as untouchable. They believed they could bring her down, undermine her authority. They didn't understand that Serena's strength didn't come from the titles she held or the reputation she had built. Her strength came from her ability to see through people, to understand that change didn't happen without a fight. It was Charlie Matthews, the once troubled student, who first noticed something wasn't right. He had been working with Serena, taking her challenges to heart, trying to rise above the persona that had been thrust upon him. He'd started turning in assignments early, participating in class, even helping some of the other students with their work. It wasn't perfect, but he was trying. And Serena noticed. But he also noticed the odd behavior of some of the students who had once been at the center of the school's social hierarchy. They weren't showing up for class. They were hanging back. They were avoiding the kind of engagement Serena had been asking for. Charlie was beginning to understand what was happening. The resistance was real, and they were working in the shadows, trying to bring Serena's reign to an end. One afternoon, as the school bell rang and students began to flood out of their classrooms, Serena stood by her office door, watching. She saw a group of seniors, led by Samantha Perkins, gather in the corner of the hallway, their heads low in conversation. Samantha, the once untouchable leader of the school, was talking in hushed tones with a few of her close friends, her face twisted in frustration. Serena could tell they were planning something. She didn't need to hear their words. Their body language said it all. Serena stepped out of her office and walked over to them, her heels clicking against the tile floor, sharp and purposeful. The group went silent as she approached. "Ms. Perkins," Serena said, her voice cutting through the tension, "I think it's time we had a talk." Samantha looked up, trying to hide her annoyance behind a practiced smile. "Principal Williams," she said, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness, "what can I do for you?" Serena didn't smile back. She didn't need to. "You and your friends have been causing a lot of distractions. I suggest you stop before it escalates further." Samantha's eyes narrowed, but she held her ground. "I'm not sure what you mean. We're just trying to get through the day like everyone else." "Oh, I know what you're doing," Serena said, leaning in slightly, her eyes never leaving Samantha's. "And if you think this little rebellion of yours is going unnoticed, you're mistaken." Samantha's defiance faltered for a brief moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "I'm not sure what you're talking about, Principal Williams. I'm just doing what's best for my classmates." Serena didn't flinch. "Let me make it clear. This school doesn't run on you or your classmates' whims. It runs on hard work, responsibility, and accountability. If you're here to waste everyone's time, you'll be the one paying the price. But if you're here to learn, to grow, to be more than just the leader of a group of students with no future, then you'll find I'm the principal who can help you do that." Samantha's expression hardened, her mask of politeness cracking for just a moment. "You don't know what you're asking of us. You're changing everything, and we don't even know who you are anymore." Serena's voice softened, but there was no mistaking the weight behind her words. "I know exactly who I am. I'm someone who doesn't back down from challenges. And I'm giving you the chance to rise to the occasion. But you need to decide if you're going to rise or continue hiding behind excuses. Because if you keep fighting me, you'll only be fighting yourself." The silence that followed was thick. Samantha opened her mouth to speak, but Serena had already turned away, leaving the words unspoken. She didn't need to engage any longer. Her point had been made. That evening, after school, Serena received another note. This time, it was more serious. The words were scrawled on a piece of paper, filled with more rage than sarcasm. "You don't belong here. Leave before we make you." Serena didn't flinch. She folded the note, tossed it aside, and walked over to the window of her office. The sun was setting, painting the sky with vibrant hues of orange and pink. But the tranquility of the scene couldn't hide the storm brewing at Woodlands High. She knew there was more to this than just a few rebellious students. There were forces at work, powers that didn't want to be challenged. The resistance wasn't just about one student or one group of students. It was a manifestation of everything that was wrong with the system. The complacency, the apathy, the idea that high school was just a place to pass the time until they were old enough to do something else. Serena was changing that. She was demanding more than what they thought they were capable of. And they were fighting back. The next day, Serena made her move. She wasn't going to wait for the rebellion to escalate. She called an emergency assembly, gathering every student in the gym. When they filed in, they could feel the shift. This was no longer about small talk or reprimanding a few troublemakers. This was about something bigger. Serena stood at the podium, her presence filling the room. Every eye in the gym was on her, but none of them dared look away. This was a moment of reckoning. "You wanted to challenge me?" Serena's voice echoed in the gym. "I'm giving you the challenge. You can fight against me, you can fight against the rules, but I'm not here to make it easy for you. If you want to succeed, you'll need to work harder than you've ever worked before. If you want to be someone who matters, you'll have to fight for it. And I will help you. But if you think you can get away with laziness, rebellion, and the same old excuses, then you're in the wrong place." The silence that followed was deafening. The students didn't cheer. They didn't jeer. They just listened. Serena wasn't going to stop. The fight was on, and she was prepared to win. The days that followed the assembly felt like an electric current running through the school. Every student, every teacher felt it. Woodlands High wasn't just a school anymore, it was a battleground. Serena had drawn a line in the sand, and she wasn't backing down. Those who had once seen high school as a place to simply pass the time, those who coasted by, those who lived in the comfortable bubble of mediocrity, now found themselves being forced to reckon with their choices. Serena's approach had been simple: rise to the challenge, or get out of the way. It wasn't just about academic excellence. It wasn't just about getting the grades or acing a test. It was about forging a mindset, a mentality of greatness, of realizing that high school was the first step in their journey. It wasn't a place to stagnate, to waste time. It was a place to build a future. But not everyone saw it that way. The resistance had grown. What started as a small group of rebellious seniors now had allies in every corner of the school. Students who once stood on the sidelines, indifferent to the changes Serena was pushing, now found themselves drawn to the cause. It wasn't just the seniors. The juniors, the underclassmen, all began to question what Serena was doing. They were no longer just whispering in hallways. They were organizing, planning, preparing. The latest act of defiance came in the form of a school-wide walkout. The plan had been hatched in secret. The students had been speaking in hushed tones, coordinating through text messages, group chats, and late-night meetings. On the appointed day, as the final bell rang for the afternoon, they were supposed to stand up, walk out, and make a statement. It wasn't just a protest, it was a challenge, a direct confrontation with Serena. But they underestimated one thing. Serena wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of an easy fight. The walkout day arrived, and students gathered in the hallways, shuffling in clusters, watching the clock tick down to the final moments. The bell rang, and as planned, the students stood up, pushing away from their desks and filing out the door. But as they reached the exit, they were met with an unexpected sight. Standing in the doorway was Serena. Her presence was imposing, her arms crossed in front of her chest, her gaze unwavering. She didn't speak at first. She didn't need to. The students halted in their tracks, unsure how to proceed. They hadn't anticipated this. Serena had anticipated them. "Where do you think you're going?" she asked, her voice low but filled with authority. No one spoke. "You're making a statement," Serena continued, her eyes scanning the group of students. "But what is it you're trying to say? That you're angry? That you're upset with the changes I've made?" Her gaze locked on a few of the ringleaders, including Samantha Perkins. She had expected this. The whispers had grown louder, the threats more frequent. And now, here they were, trying to make a point. "I'll tell you what you're saying," Serena continued, stepping closer, her voice growing firmer with each word. "You're saying that you don't want to be held accountable. You're saying you don't want to be challenged. You're saying that you'd rather leave than face the discomfort of growth." The students stood frozen, but they couldn't look away. Serena wasn't yelling. She wasn't threatening. She was speaking the truth. And it cut deeper than anything they had expected. "You want to walk out?" Serena said, her voice almost a whisper now. "Then walk out. But know this, you're not walking away from me. You're walking away from yourselves. From the future that you're capable of. You're walking away from the chance to be better than you ever thought possible." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. The silence in the hallway was deafening. Then, in a final, decisive moment, she stepped aside. "The door is open. You can leave. But if you do, don't expect me to be here when you come back. This school is for the ones who want to stay and fight. For the ones who want to rise above the noise and the distractions. If you're not willing to do that, then this is not the place for you." For a long moment, no one moved. But slowly, reluctantly, the group began to disperse. Some students hung their heads, realizing the fight wasn't worth it. Others lingered for a moment, their rebellion dissipating in the face of Serena's unflinching resolve. One by one, they filtered back into the classrooms, some with their heads held high, others with their shoulders slumped. But the message was clear. Serena wasn't going anywhere. And neither were they, not if they wanted to truly belong at Woodlands High. As the students trickled back into the classrooms, Serena didn't watch them. She didn't need to. She knew the true fight had just begun. The next day, the rebellion had lost its momentum. The students who had once plotted to bring Serena down now found themselves questioning their choices. They had learned something critical. Serena wasn't someone they could easily manipulate. She wasn't someone they could intimidate. She wasn't just a principle, she was a force of nature. And no matter how hard they tried to fight her, they would never break her. But there was still one student who wasn't ready to accept defeat. Samantha Perkins, shaken by the events of the previous day, wasn't about to back down just yet. She had been embarrassed, publicly, in front of her friends, in front of everyone. And she wasn't going to let Serena win. Not like this. Samantha began plotting again, but this time, her rebellion would be different. It wouldn't be a walkout. It wouldn't be a protest. It would be something far more personal. Meanwhile, Charlie Matthews, once the school's troublemaker, had started to see the fruits of his decision to embrace Serena's challenge. His grades had improved, his behavior had changed, and most importantly, he felt like he was finally taking control of his own future. Serena had seen something in him that he hadn't even seen in himself, and now he was starting to understand what she had been trying to teach all along. Charlie had begun to help other students who were struggling with Serena's expectations. It was ironic. The boy who had once been at the center of every rebellion was now becoming the one who encouraged others to take the challenge. He was slowly but surely becoming the student that Serena had hoped he would be. And in doing so, he began to gain the respect of his peers. But not everyone was so willing to follow the same path. The school was still divided, those who accepted Serena's challenge, and those who fought against it. It was the natural consequence of the divide Serena had caused. And she wasn't surprised. As the school year wore on, the rebellion continued to simmer beneath the surface, but it was clear that Serena had won the battle for now. She had proven that she would not be swayed, not by whispers, not by threats, and not by the will of students who had grown accustomed to getting by with a bare minimum. The students who had once been part of the resistance were now quietly realizing that the real challenge wasn't against Serena. It was against themselves. The true rebellion wasn't in walking out or fighting her, it was in confronting their own complacency, their own fear of growth. And that was something that no walkout or protest could undo. After the walkout, things at Woodlands High seemed to settle, but the tension was far from gone. It had only changed shape. The students who had once fought against Serena were no longer as vocal, but the damage had been done. There were quiet exchanges in hallways, furtive glances in classrooms, and the unmistakable feeling that change was inescapable. The students had been shaken, but they were still questioning, still grappling with Serena's philosophy of relentless challenge and growth. Some students had come to terms with it. They had embraced Serena's challenge, pushing themselves harder, achieving things they hadn't thought possible. They were starting to understand that Serena wasn't here to be liked. She was here to make them better, to prepare them for a world that wouldn't give them a pass just because they were tired, scared, or unwilling to try. But for others, the pressure was becoming unbearable. It was in the middle of the semester when Serena began to notice the cracks that had started to form beneath the surface. The students who had initially rallied against her, who had joined the resistance, were now quietly sabotaging their own futures. Their rebellion had morphed into something less visible, less confrontational, but just as dangerous: apathy. The quiet rebellion was taking hold. One afternoon, Serena sat in her office, reviewing the latest round of grades. A few students, including Samantha Perkins, had slipped through the cracks. They had stopped coming to class on time, their work was half-hearted at best, and they were becoming increasingly disruptive. Serena had expected this kind of resistance, but she had hoped they would find it within themselves to rise above it. Instead, it seemed like the weight of the challenge had broken them. As she looked over the report cards, one name stood out: Charlie Matthews. His grades were soaring, his attendance had improved, and his behavior had transformed. He had gone from a student constantly in trouble, failing to meet expectations, to someone who had started to lead others, someone who had embraced the challenge Serena had laid out. He wasn't the only one. The students who had quietly followed her lead, the ones who had accepted her challenge, were beginning to form a core group, a new kind of student council that wasn't based on popularity or charm, but on merit and the desire to push boundaries. But as Serena's influence spread, so did the resistance, just not in the way she expected. The resistance had become more subtle. Students who had once staged protests and walked out were now turning inward, retreating into themselves, and pulling others down with them. Samantha Perkins, who had been at the forefront of the rebellion, had quietly stopped participating in class discussions. She no longer cared about maintaining her popularity. She was slowly drifting into the background. She had withdrawn, not from Serena's leadership, but from the school entirely. And that, Serena knew, was the real danger. A week later, after school hours, Serena found herself at the basketball court, watching a practice session. The gym was nearly empty, with only a few students shooting hoops. Serena didn't play sports anymore. Her body no longer allowed for it, but she always found a certain peace in watching the game. It was familiar. It reminded her of the discipline she had built throughout her career. But this time, she wasn't just watching for the sake of nostalgia. She was looking for something deeper. Something she had seen in a few students but wasn't sure was in all of them. Charlie Matthews was on the court, practicing his free throws. He was alone, pushing himself with a quiet intensity, his brow furrowed in concentration. Serena watched for a moment before walking toward the bleachers, where Charlie had set his things. When he saw her approach, he paused, wiping his face with a towel. "Good evening, Principal Williams," Charlie said, his voice quieter than usual. "You're working hard," Serena observed, sitting down beside him. "I can see you're pushing yourself." Charlie nodded. "I have to. I can't afford to slip again." Serena studied him carefully. There was something different about him, something that had shifted in his demeanor since the beginning of the year. He had grown, not just in his academics, but in his mindset. She had challenged him, and he had taken that challenge to heart. "You know," she said, her voice thoughtful, "most of your classmates won't understand the fight you're in. But you do. And that's all that matters." Charlie looked at her, his eyes sharp but wary. "But the others, they don't get it. They just want things to be easy. They don't see what you see." Serena leaned forward slightly. "The hardest part isn't the challenge, Charlie. The hardest part is choosing the challenge when it's easier to walk away. You're doing the right thing. You're stepping up." He shook his head. "But it's not enough. Not yet. I mean, I'm trying, but I'm not sure I'm good enough to keep going. Sometimes it feels like I'm running out of time." "Everyone feels that way," Serena replied, her tone steady. "But it's not about being good enough right now. It's about pushing yourself further than you've ever gone before. It's about not stopping, even when you think you've reached your limit. And that's how you win. One step at a time." There was a long pause between them. Charlie didn't speak immediately. Instead, he stared at the basketball in his hands, turning it slowly as he absorbed Serena's words. "I get it," he finally said. "I'll keep going." Serena gave him a small nod. "Good. Because I'm not done pushing you yet." Charlie looked up at her, a flicker of determination lighting his eyes. "I know." Back at the school the next day, the effects of Serena's unyielding expectations began to take a more obvious shape. The students who had once resisted were now split into two distinct groups, those who had decided to take the challenge head-on, and those who had quietly fallen off the radar. It wasn't rebellion anymore, it was indifference. And that, Serena realized, was the most dangerous part. In the classroom, teachers had started to notice the shift. Mr. Callahan, who had once been unsure of how to handle the pressure Serena placed on him, was now a changed man. He had embraced the challenge, his lessons more engaging, more thought-provoking than ever. His students were responding, even the ones who had initially given him trouble. He was getting through to them, just like Serena had gotten through to him. But not everyone had risen to the occasion. In one classroom, Samantha Perkins had stopped showing up for class altogether. She had started skipping, not out of defiance, but out of resignation. She wasn't fighting anymore. She was simply giving up. Serena knew that Samantha's retreat wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign that the fight had taken a toll. Serena had seen it countless times before. The ones who couldn't take the pressure, the ones who couldn't handle the discomfort of growth, were the ones who fell away. Samantha's decline wasn't an isolated case. It was happening to others, slowly, quietly. But Serena wouldn't let that happen without a fight. She called Samantha to her office that afternoon, not to scold her, but to remind her of something she had almost forgotten. "Samantha, Serena said as she gestured for the girl to sit. "You've got more potential than you realize. More than anyone here. But if you keep running from the challenge, you're only running from yourself." Samantha didn't respond right away. She looked down at her hands, as if trying to come up with an excuse, a justification. "I don't think I can do this," she finally admitted. "I'm not like the others. I can't keep up." "You don't have to keep up with anyone else, Samantha," Serena said gently. "You only need to keep up with yourself. You need to push yourself, not for anyone else, but for you. Because the minute you stop, that's when you lose. But the minute you decide to fight, to really fight, there's no limit to what you can do." Samantha lifted her gaze, her eyes filled with doubt but also something else, a flicker of hope, of possibility. "You're not alone in this, Samantha. But you have to want to change. No one can do that for you." It had been a month since the walkout and the quiet rebellion that had followed. The mood at Woodlands High had shifted again, but this time it was more subdued. The anger that once flared up in response to Serena's leadership had been replaced by something more insidious: indifference. Students walked through the halls with their heads down, going through the motions, but not fully engaged. Serena's methods had been effective in some ways. They had pushed the students to think more deeply, to confront their own weaknesses. But for others, those who had been unwilling to accept the challenge, the pressure had become unbearable. Serena's leadership was beginning to carve a deep divide within the school. On one side were the students who had embraced her challenge, who were beginning to show results. Students like Charlie Matthews, whose transformation had become a model for others to follow. They were the ones who had put in the work, who had taken Serena's words to heart, and who were now beginning to reap the rewards. On the other side were the ones who had fallen behind. They weren't actively rebelling anymore, but they weren't thriving either. They had learned to keep their heads down, to get by without fully committing, without embracing the challenge. Some of them, like Samantha Perkins, had quietly disengaged, slipping through the cracks, fading into the background. Serena knew that this was just as dangerous as the open rebellion. The first sign that things were coming to a head came during a staff meeting. Serena sat at the head of the table, watching her teachers carefully as they discussed their students' progress. She had noticed something in their tone, an undercurrent of doubt, of uncertainty. At first, she had chalked it up to the usual resistance that came with change. But now, she was beginning to wonder if the teachers, too, were starting to crack under the pressure. "I don't know if it's sustainable," Mr. Callahan, the history teacher, said, his voice weary. "I've been pushing my students harder, but I'm seeing a lot of burnout. Some of them are starting to disengage. It's like we've pushed them so hard that they don't know how to handle it anymore." Serena listened, her gaze steady. She had been waiting for this moment. She knew it was coming. The question was, how would she respond? "You're seeing disengagement because some of your students haven't learned to deal with the discomfort of growth," she said, her voice calm but firm. "They're not used to being pushed. They're used to coasting, to getting by without really trying. And when you challenge them, when you make them uncomfortable, they resist. But that doesn't mean we stop challenging them. It means we push harder." There was a pause in the room. Serena could feel the tension rising. The teachers exchanged glances, unsure of how to respond. "I'm not saying we let them off the hook," Mr. Callahan replied slowly. "But we can't just keep pushing them until they break." Serena met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "We're not breaking them. We're forging them. The only way to strengthen steel is through fire. If they don't rise to the challenge, that's not on us. That's on them." She stood up, her voice carrying across the room. "I will not back down. Not now. Not ever. We are here to do more than teach subjects. We are here to teach these students how to face the world. And the world is not going to give them a free pass. If we let them off the hook, we're doing them a disservice." There was silence, but Serena could see the unease in the room. She had made her point, but it was clear that the staff was beginning to feel the weight of her demands. They had signed up to teach, not to be part of a war zone. "Think about it," Serena continued, her voice softer now. "This isn't about us. It's about them. And if we don't push them now, they'll be lost when they leave this school. They'll be unprepared for the real world." The room was still, the weight of her words settling over the teachers. One by one, they nodded, but Serena knew the resistance wasn't over. It was just beginning. That afternoon, as the school bell rang, Serena walked the hallways of Woodlands High, observing the students who were milling about. Some of them still wore the same expression of uncertainty, lost in the crowd, too afraid to step forward and too proud to admit they needed help. She had made her impact, but now she had to decide how far she was willing to go to ensure that her message took root. As she passed by the lockers, she saw Samantha Perkins standing alone. Her posture was defeated, her head bowed, and for a moment, Serena almost didn't recognize her. The once confident, outspoken leader of the student body was now a shell of her former self. Her rebellion had fizzled out, but so had her spark. She was a student who had once believed she could change the world. But now, she was unsure even of herself. Serena stopped in front of her. "Samantha." Samantha looked up, her eyes dull. "Principal Williams. Are you still going to run away?" Serena asked, her tone softer than it had ever been with Samantha before. "Are you going to give up because it's hard?" Samantha opened her mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. She wanted to fight. She wanted to push back, but something inside her had shifted. She had never expected to be this far gone, this close to the edge. And Serena knew it. "You don't have to keep fighting me, Samantha," Serena said quietly. "You just have to fight for yourself. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to try. You just have to take the first step." Samantha didn't say anything, but for the first time in weeks, her eyes brightened. She wasn't sure what Serena saw in her, but maybe, just maybe, she could find that spark again. "I'm not giving up on you," Serena continued. "But you have to want this. You have to fight for it. No one can do it for you." Samantha stood there in silence, but Serena could feel the shift. It wasn't over yet. But maybe, just maybe, there was hope. In the days that followed, the shift was noticeable. The resistance had faded into the background, but there was still a palpable sense of unrest. Serena knew that the battle wasn't over. The fight for control over Woodlands High was far from won. But as she watched her students push themselves harder, as she saw the ones who had once been disengaged begin to step forward, she felt a flicker of hope. Serena wasn't trying to make everyone like her. She wasn't trying to fit in. She was trying to prepare them for a world that wouldn't cut them any slack. A world that would demand more, demand effort, and demand greatness. And if that meant pushing them to their limits, if that meant taking them to the brink, then she would. Because that was the only way to prepare them for what was coming. The air in Woodlands High was thick with anticipation. The school year was winding down, and the first signs of summer began to creep in. Longer days, warmer air, and the promise of freedom just around the corner. But for Serena Williams, there was no such thing as an easy end. As the students prepared for finals, the divide at Woodlands High was clearer than ever. Some had embraced the challenge she had set before them, rising to new heights of achievement and self-awareness. Others, those who had resisted her from the beginning, were now trapped in their own apathy, unable, or unwilling, to face what was required of them. It was during this final stretch, when the pressure was the heaviest, that the cracks in the school's foundation began to show. Serena had spent the entire year pushing, demanding, never relenting. She had challenged every student, every teacher, to be their best. But as the year drew to a close, the toll of constant expectation began to weigh heavily on those who couldn't, or wouldn't, adapt. It started with a phone call that Serena had been expecting. The principal's office had been a revolving door in recent weeks, but this call, this particular call, felt different. She had known it was coming. She had known that Samantha Perkins, despite the flicker of hope Serena had seen in her, was on the verge of breaking completely. "Samantha Perkins," Serena said, her voice even, as she sat in her office, looking at the file in front of her. "I've been hearing things. Things I don't like. So let's talk." The door to her office creaked open, and Samantha stepped in, her shoulders slumped. She didn't meet Serena's eyes at first, and for a moment, there was a heavy silence between them. Samantha had changed, there was no doubt about that. But whether it was for the better was another question entirely. Her posture had always been confident, unshakable. Now, she looked like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Serena gestured to the chair in front of her desk. "Sit down." Samantha obeyed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I can't do this anymore, she said quietly, her voice barely audible. I've tried. But I'm not like everyone else. I don't know what you want from me. Serena leaned forward slightly, her gaze softening but firm. What I want from you is simple, Samantha. I want you to stop running. I want you to stop thinking you're different. You have the same potential as anyone else in this school, but you've convinced yourself that you can't meet the challenge. That's not me, Samantha. That's you. Samantha's lips quivered slightly, but she didn't speak for a long moment. Finally, her voice cracked. I don't know if I can do it. I'm not like Charlie. I'm not like the others. They get it, but I don't. I keep failing. Serena's eyes never left her. You're failing because you've let yourself believe you can't succeed. That's the real failure. You're comparing yourself to others instead of focusing on your own progress. The challenge isn't about being perfect. It's about pushing through when you think you can't go any further. It's about finding out who you really are. Samantha's eyes welled up with tears, but she quickly wiped them away, embarrassed. I don't know who I am anymore. I used to have it all figured out. I was on top, I was in control. But now, I just feel lost. Serena exhaled deeply, her voice lowering to a gentle tone. You were never in control, Samantha. You were comfortable. But comfort doesn't lead to growth. Growth leads to discomfort. I'm not here to make you comfortable. I'm here to make you better. And if you want to get out of this slump, you have to start with one thing. You have to believe that you can change. You have to fight for yourself. Samantha looked up, a flicker of something in her eyes. You think I can? Serena nodded slowly. I know you can. But only if you stop running away. The conversation with Samantha was the catalyst that pushed Serena to realize something she had been avoiding all year. Not everyone would rise to the challenge. Some would resist, some would break under the pressure, and some, like Samantha, would slip through the cracks despite her best efforts. But Serena also knew that she couldn't force the students to change if they weren't ready to fight for it themselves. The resistance had been loud and visible. The rebellion had taken shape in protests, in walkouts, in defiant students who believed they could break her spirit. But now, as the final exams loomed and the year came to a close, the resistance was quieter, more insidious. It was in the students who had simply checked out. Those who hadn't actively rebelled but had passively accepted defeat. It was the ones like Samantha, the ones who had the potential but couldn't see it anymore. The day of the final exam arrived. Serena stood outside the gymnasium, watching the students file in, their faces a mixture of fear and determination. This was it. The culmination of everything she had challenged them to do. She had pushed them, forced them to confront their weaknesses, to reach deeper than they thought possible. But now, the test was theirs to pass or fail. As the students settled into their seats, Serena stood at the back of the gym, her eyes scanning the room. She saw Charlie Matthews, sitting at the front, his posture upright, his expression calm but focused. He had come so far, and now, he was ready. He wasn't the same kid who had walked into Woodlands High at the start of the year. He had fought for his future, and now, he was about to prove to himself that he had what it took to succeed. Then her gaze shifted to Samantha. She was seated at the back, her hands shaking as she gripped her pen. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, and Serena could see it. The same defeat that had taken root in her heart had spread like a cancer. She wasn't ready for this moment, not yet. As the exams were handed out, Serena's heart ached for the students who had quietly given up, for the ones who had stopped trying. She knew she couldn't save them all. But that didn't mean she would stop trying. When the exam period was over, and the students filed out of the gym, Serena remained standing, her thoughts lingering on the ones who had slipped through the cracks. But she also knew that some had risen. Some had embraced the challenge she had set before them. Charlie Matthews walked up to her as the last student left the gym. His face was a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. He had done it. He had faced the challenge and emerged stronger. Serena smiled at him, proud of how far he had come. You did it, Charlie, she said, her voice soft with admiration. I did, he said, his voice steady. But it wasn't just about the grades. It was about realizing that I could actually do it. That I could be more than I ever thought I was. Serena nodded. That's the real victory. The The results of the exams came in a week later, and as expected, the divide at Woodlands High was even clearer than before. Charlie Matthews had scored at the top of his class, a student who had once been at the bottom, now sitting at the top because he had chosen to fight for his future. Samantha Perkins, however, had barely scraped by. The fight had been too much for her. The pressure had been too great. Serena didn't feel anger or frustration. She felt something more complex, sadness. She had given everything she had to help them, but she knew, deep down, that only a few could see the value in the challenge. Some were willing to fight. Some weren't. The weeks following the final exams at Woodlands High felt like a slow, almost agonizing drip of change. The school, which had once been filled with the low hum of a routine year, now sat in a suspended state. Serena had pushed them all to the edge. Some had made the leap, others had fallen short, and a few had just quietly stepped away from the challenge altogether. The summer sun was bright outside, the air warm and heavy with the promise of a break, but inside the school walls, there was a quiet tension. The halls, which had once echoed with the buzz of students rushing from class to class, now seemed emptier, more distant. As the semester came to an end, Serena could feel the weight of what she had set in motion. Her philosophy of hard work, grit, and no-nonsense leadership had worked for some, like Charlie Matthews, who had transformed before her eyes. But for others, like Samantha Perkins, it had led to burnout, frustration, and a sense of disillusionment. Serena knew she couldn't save them all. She had told herself that. But as the year wound down, she began to wonder if she had gone too far. One morning, Serena sat at her desk, the usual piles of paperwork scattered around her. But her mind wasn't on the administrative tasks or the details of next year's curriculum. It was on the faces of the students she had tried to change. She couldn't stop replaying the image of Samantha's defeated expression after the final exams. She had seen it before in her own career, in tennis, in the relentless pursuit of excellence, in the faces of those who couldn't handle the pressure. And each time, it left a mark. As she sat there, lost in thought, the door to her office opened, and in walked Mr. Callahan, the history teacher who had been one of the first to question her methods. "Good morning, Principal Williams," Mr. Callahan said, his tone more somber than usual. "Morning, Mr. Callahan. How can I help you?" Serena asked, trying to keep her voice steady. She knew this conversation was coming, she just didn't know when. She could feel the undercurrent of doubt in the staff. They had started out believing in her, but now they were questioning. "I think we need to talk," Mr. Callahan began, sitting down across from her. "About what's been happening here. About what we've seen over the past few months." Serena didn't flinch. She had been expecting this. "I'm listening. I've been seeing a lot of students struggle, more than I expected. Some of them, like Charlie, have clearly risen to the challenge. But others, they're cracking. And not just the ones who were already struggling. Even the ones who had been doing okay are starting to lose their way." Serena stayed quiet, waiting for him to continue. "You've set a standard here, and that's not a bad thing," Mr. Callahan continued, his voice measured. "But I think it's becoming too much. We've pushed them so hard that some of them don't know where to turn anymore. It's like we've broken them." Serena's gaze didn't waver. She had heard this before from other leaders, those who believed in softness, in a gentler hand. But she didn't believe in that. "I didn't break anyone, Mr. Callahan. I gave them the opportunity to rise. If they couldn't meet the challenge, then that's on them. This isn't a place for complacency." Mr. Callahan exhaled sharply. "I get that, I do. But, at what cost? Some of them are so beaten down that they can't see the value in what you're asking. Some of them, especially the ones like Samantha, are just lost." Serena stood up, walking over to the window. She stared out at the quiet campus. "I can't afford to be soft. They need to understand the world isn't going to give them a free pass. I want them to be ready, to be resilient." "But resilience doesn't come from breaking," Mr. Callahan said quietly. "It comes from building, from pushing through adversity, yes, but not from making people feel like failures when they fall short. You're asking for perfection, Serena, and sometimes that's more than anyone can give." The conversation left Serena shaken, even if she wouldn't admit it to anyone, least of all herself. Mr. Callahan's words echoed in her mind, and they planted a seed of doubt, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Was it possible she had pushed too hard? Was it possible that the line between challenge and cruelty was thinner than she had realized? The truth was, she hadn't known how deep the consequences would be. The kids who had fought back, the ones who had walked out, had been the obvious rebels. But the quiet ones, the ones like Samantha who had withdrawn into themselves, those were the ones she hadn't anticipated. Those were the students who would quietly slip through the cracks. And now, Serena found herself questioning her own methods. She had asked them to fight for something greater than themselves, but was it worth it if it meant losing them in the process? Later that day, Serena called Samantha into her office once again. She had been avoiding it, unsure of what to say, but she knew this was the moment. If there was any chance of saving the student who had once embodied everything Serena had hoped for, it was now. When Samantha walked in, her eyes were dull, and she didn't speak immediately. Serena could see the defeat in her. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't fighting. She had just given up. "Samantha," Serena began, her voice softer than it had ever been. "You know I've always pushed you. I've pushed you because I believe in you. But I think I may have pushed too far. And for that, I'm sorry." Samantha's eyes flickered with surprise. "Sorry?" "Yes," Serena said, sitting down behind her desk, her hands clasped together. "I thought I was doing the right thing by pushing you, by challenging you. But I see now that I may have missed something. I've been so focused on the challenge that I forgot to meet you where you are. I expected you to rise, but maybe I didn't give you the space to breathe. To be." Samantha shook her head, her eyes still filled with doubt. "I don't know how to do this anymore. I've tried, but I'm not who I was. I'm not who I thought I'd be." Serena leaned forward. "You're exactly who you need to be, Samantha. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be anyone else. You just need to start again. One step at a time." There was a long silence. Samantha didn't respond, but Serena could see the flicker of something behind her eyes, a flicker of hope. Not much, but enough to start again. The next few weeks were a blur of finalizing grades, reflecting on the year, and preparing for the summer break. But as Serena sat in her office, looking at the empty classrooms, she realized something. She had done what she set out to do. She had challenged them. She had made them confront their weaknesses. She had shown them that they were capable of more than they believed. But she had also learned something valuable herself. Leadership wasn't about being unbreakable. It wasn't about demanding perfection. It was about knowing when to push, when to pull back, and when to let the students, all of them, find their own way. The final days of school arrived, and with them, a bittersweet sense of finality. Woodlands High had been through a whirlwind of challenges, from student rebellions to personal breakthroughs, from the exhaustion of constant pressure to the quiet victories that had been achieved. It had been a year of relentless change, of pushing boundaries and forcing everyone, teachers, students, and even herself, to confront the uncomfortable truth that nothing worth having came easily. Serena sat in her office, looking out at the campus as the sun set, casting a warm orange glow over the school. The halls were silent now. The students had already left for the summer. But the echo of their footsteps still lingered in the air, as if they were all still here, still fighting, still struggling, still growing. She thought about Charlie Matthews. He had started the year as the school's troublemaker, the student no one had believed in. And now, here he was, top of his class, a leader in his own right, with a newfound sense of purpose and confidence. Charlie was a testament to everything she had hoped for when she took this job. He had risen to the challenge, and in doing so, he had discovered a strength he never knew he had. Serena had pushed him, but it was his own will that had carried him forward. Then there was Samantha Perkins. Serena couldn't help but think of her, even though the conversation they'd had just days before was still fresh in her mind. Samantha, once the shining star of Woodlands High, had faltered under the pressure. She had retreated into herself, unsure of who she was without the pedestal she had once stood on. Serena had pushed her hard, perhaps too hard, and in the end, she had broken. But was that her failure, or Samantha's? Serena wasn't sure. She had tried to save Samantha from the defeat that had been creeping into her heart for months, but sometimes, a person had to save themselves. And maybe that was the hardest lesson Serena had learned this year. No matter how much she wanted to push them, to mold them into something greater, she couldn't do the work for them. She couldn't want it more than they did. The day of the final staff meeting arrived, and for the first time all year, Serena felt the weight of the room as she walked in. The teachers, those who had stuck with her, those who had challenged her, and those who had quietly doubted her, sat around the table. The air was thick with unspoken words, and Serena knew they were all wondering the same thing. What had this year really accomplished? As the meeting began, Mr. Callahan spoke first. He had been one of the staunchest supporters of Serena's leadership from the start, but there was a noticeable weariness in his voice now. "Principal Williams," he began, "we've seen a lot of changes this year. Some good, some, well, not so good. I think we all feel it. The students are different, some of them more engaged, some of them more lost. I think the challenge was harder than anyone expected. We've pushed them, and in many ways, we've pushed them too far." Serena listened carefully, nodding. She knew this was coming. She had expected it. The question had always been in the back of her mind. Had she done the right thing? "I know it hasn't been easy for anyone," Serena said, her voice steady but tinged with the vulnerability she hadn't allowed herself to show all year. "But I believe in what we've done here. We've raised the bar. We've demanded more from these students than anyone ever has. And yes, some of them didn't meet that challenge. But some of them did. And that," she paused, looking around the room at the faces of the teachers who had supported her, "that's what matters." There was a moment of silence as the teachers exchanged glances. No one spoke immediately, but Serena could feel the tension lifting, the unspoken doubts fading, even if just a little. Mr. Callahan cleared his throat. "I'm with you, Serena. We've made a difference. I just think, maybe next year, we need to be more mindful of the pressure we put on them. We can't keep pushing them to the brink. We need to build them up, not just break them down." Serena nodded, taking a deep breath. "You're right. We need to find a balance. I've been so focused on making them better that I forgot the process of change doesn't always happen overnight. It's not just about the end result, it's about the journey. And the journey can't always be a fight." The rest of the meeting passed in a blur, the discussions of the upcoming school year, of new strategies, and of how to refine the approach for the next group of students. But Serena's mind wasn't fully on the meeting anymore. It was on the lessons she had learned, the lessons about leadership, about pushing others to their limits, and about the true cost of that push. By the time the meeting wrapped up, she was left alone in her office again. The sun had set, and the campus outside was eerily quiet. She took a long breath, allowing herself a moment of reflection. It had been a year of growth, for the students, for the teachers, and for her. But the question remained, had it been enough? Had she done enough to change them, to prepare them for the real world? Serena didn't know the answer yet, but she would find it. She always did. As the school year came to an end, the students filed out for summer break, some with the weight of finals still heavy on their minds, others with the quiet satisfaction of having risen to the challenge. Serena watched them go, each one a reflection of what had been gained and what had been lost. Some had been transformed by the pressure, emerging stronger than they had ever imagined. Others had cracked, unable to meet the demands, leaving Serena to wonder if there was a better way, a gentler way, to achieve the same result. But as the last students disappeared into the distance, Serena understood something. She had given them the tools to succeed. Not the answers, but the tools. What they chose to do with those tools was their decision. She could only guide them, she couldn't do the work for them. And that, she realized, was the truest test of leadership. As the summer began and the school emptied, Serena's mind turned toward the future. She had pushed them to the limit, had demanded greatness, and had seen the results. Some had risen, some had fallen, and some had simply walked away. But that was the nature of life, wasn't it? Not everyone would rise to the challenge. Not everyone would see the value in pushing themselves. And not everyone would be able to meet the standards she had set. But for those who had made it, those who had persevered, Serena could rest easy knowing that she had given them something that would last far beyond the walls of Woodlands High. She had given them the courage to rise. The sun had barely risen over Woodlands High, casting long shadows over the empty campus. The summer break had officially begun, and with it came the silence that always followed the storm. The students were gone, their voices and laughter replaced by the stillness that marked the end of another school year. Serena stood at her office window, watching the empty halls, the classrooms now stripped of their chaos and energy. It was peaceful, but it was also a reminder of everything she had fought for over the past year. She had come to Woodlands High to change things, to push the students to their limits and force them to confront their potential. She had wanted to prepare them for the real world, to make them understand that success wasn't just handed to you, it had to be earned. But as she stood there now, watching the school that had been her battleground, she couldn't help but wonder if she had truly accomplished what she set out to do. Her thoughts drifted to the faces of the students who had crossed her path, the ones who had risen, and the ones who had fallen. Charlie Matthews, who had started as a troublemaker and emerged as one of the school's brightest stars. He had taken the challenge and transformed himself, rising to meet the expectations she had set. But then there was Samantha Perkins, who had once been the heart of the school, the leader everyone admired. She had slipped through the cracks, retreating into herself, unable to handle the pressure. Samantha had once been the student who had the most potential, and yet, in the end, she was the one who had given up. Serena had learned something important from her time at Woodlands. Leadership wasn't just about demanding greatness from others, it was about recognizing when to push and when to step back. It was about finding the balance between challenge and support, between pushing for excellence and understanding the limits of those you were leading. She had learned that not everyone could meet the challenge in the same way. Some students needed the fire to ignite their potential, while others needed a gentler hand to guide them. The final staff meeting of the year had come and gone, and the teachers had all said their goodbyes, their voices a mixture of exhaustion and relief. Some had questioned her methods, some had embraced them. But as the last teacher left her office, Serena couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed within her, too. She wasn't the same person who had walked through those doors at the start of the year. She had pushed herself just as much as her students, confronted her own weaknesses, and discovered that her own leadership was a constant work in progress. It wasn't just about results, it was about the journey. A few days later, Serena sat in the small cafeteria with a cup of coffee, her hands wrapped around the warm mug as she reflected on the year. The room was empty now, save for the faint echoes of conversations long gone. She felt a strange peace, a quiet satisfaction that hadn't been there at the start. There had been moments of doubt, of uncertainty, but there had also been moments of triumph. Moments when she had seen the spark in a student's eyes as they finally understood the lesson, as they realized they were capable of so much more than they thought. And those moments had made it all worth it. Serena's phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Charlie Matthews. "Thank you for everything, Principal Williams. I don't think I would have made it without your challenge. I'm going to be better, because you showed me I could be. See you next year." Serena smiled, her eyes momentarily stinging. It wasn't just the grades or the accolades that mattered, it was the change in Charlie, in the way he had carried himself with purpose. She had pushed him, yes, but it was his own choice to rise to that challenge. And that was something no one could take away from him. The door to the cafeteria opened, and Mr. Callahan walked in, carrying a stack of papers. He stopped when he saw Serena sitting at the table, her expression thoughtful. He set the papers down on the counter and walked over to join her. "Penny for your thoughts?" Mr. Callahan asked, his voice gentle. Serena looked up at him, her eyes meeting his. "Just reflecting on the year. It wasn't easy, but we did it." He nodded, taking a seat across from her. "You did it, Serena. You challenged them, and you changed them. You made them see that they're capable of more than they ever imagined. Not everyone made it, but those who did, those who embraced the challenge, they'll carry that with them for the rest of their lives." Serena leaned back in her chair, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "I hope so. I pushed them harder than I ever thought I would. And I'm not sure if that's always the right way. But it's the only way I know." "You pushed yourself too," Mr. Callahan said quietly. "This year wasn't just about them. It was about you finding your own limits, your own strengths. And you've changed too. In a good way." Serena didn't respond at first, but after a moment, she looked up at him, meeting his gaze. "I'm still figuring out what kind of leader I want to be. I don't have all the answers, and I don't think I ever will. But I've learned that leadership is about more than just giving orders. It's about inspiring people to become better versions of themselves. And sometimes, that means knowing when to step back and let them find their own way." Mr. Callahan smiled. "You've got a long road ahead of you. But I have a feeling you'll keep growing, just like your students. Serena's smile was small but genuine. I hope so. The summer stretched out before her, a time for rest, reflection, and perhaps a little self-discovery. Serena had spent the year challenging everyone else, but now she had to face the challenge of rebuilding, of learning from her own mistakes, and of figuring out what came next. As she walked out of the cafeteria, she paused at the door and turned back one last time to look at the empty school. There had been moments of doubt, moments of frustration. But there had also been moments of triumph, moments when she had seen the spark of potential in her students, when they had realized they were capable of so much more than they thought. Serena didn't know what the future held. But she knew one thing for sure: the fight to make them better, to push them to their limits, would never be over. It wasn't about winning every battle. It was about showing up every day and demanding that they show up, too. And in that, Serena found peace.